Do you ever feel like you're always jumping in to save the day at work? We call it rescuing, and it might mean jumping in to rescue people from particular situations or scenarios, whether that's taking on other people's tasks, solving problems for your team rather than letting them solve the problems themselves. We're here to explore why it happens and how to handle it better. Welcome to episode 103 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and confidence coach, Anna Manning. Now, although this is a podcast about rescuing, obviously we are not talking about members of the emergency services. If you are a member of an emergency service, please continue rescuing people. So I've got stories from 3 professionals who found themselves in this rescuing cycle. We're going to meet Sarah, Alex, and Valerie, not their real names. And they've each got unique scenarios and insights to share with you about why we rescue. We're going to look behind the urge and discover what some of the thoughts and beliefs are that might be driving that need to rescue. We're going to think about the impact. So there's unintended consequences when we rescue, both on you and on those people that you're trying to help. And we've got some practical tips. I'm not just going to be pointing out the problem, I'm actually going to offer some solutions, from stock phrases to how to handle that urge to jump in when it arises. We've got some strategies to help you break free of this rescuing habit. So what I often do when I'm thinking about recording a podcast episode is I do a bit of Googling to find out what's already out there. What can you already find out? And what is it that I can really add to this to help you actually make a change? Because what is very clear from page 1 of Google is that people do not approve of rescuing. There's all kinds of hits about how rescuers aren't always heroes and stop rescuing to feel good about yourself. And I'm like, okay, pretty judgy for first page of Google. But what that page does point out to me, and what people usually say to me when I coach them on this issue, they know that they shouldn't be rescuing, but they're still doing it. And this is one of those topics where it's great to know the theory. You may have been on a leadership training where they said, this is not the way to lead your team. Don't rescue people. You may know that. But it's hard sometimes to put these things into practice. And the reason why it's hard is because you're a human being with thoughts and feelings. And many times those thoughts and feelings are the thing standing in the way of you doing what you know technically you should be doing. So you're going to meet our real life rescuers and I'm going to share their stories. But what they don't know is that I took the stories that they told me, the things they emailed me back, I took them and I plugged them into a coaching model, which is aptly named The Model. And that model lists out the circumstances, so what the situation is, what the person is thinking in that situation, how they're feeling when they're thinking that thing, what action they take when they feel like that, and then what results they get. And breaking it down in this way makes it really clear as to what is happening in these rescue situations. So listen out for that as we go. And without further ado, I want you to meet our first rescuer, Sarah. So Sarah's moved through the ranks in her organisation and she's now a senior leader. And I asked her to tell me about rescuing. And she told me this is when rescuing happens for her. So she might be in one-on-one conversation and someone will allude to the fact or just tell her that they've got a lot on, that they're a bit overwhelmed, that they've got a lot on their plate, something like that. And she says she'll immediately jump in, take the work off them, and then usually end up doing it herself. Now, that's classic rescue mission stuff, right? And Sarah knows that in theory, she shouldn't be rescuing people, but she's still doing it. So we're not judging her in this scenario, but we're going to get a little bit further under the skin to find out why would she be doing that when she knows she shouldn't be, but she's still doing it. And here, we've got it really clearly because as well as telling us the situation in which she rescues people, this one-on-one when they're a little bit overwhelmed or they've got a lot on their plate, she also told us what her thoughts are, which are driving that rescuing behavior. And there were 3. Her first thought is, I have to act and solve the problem. Her second thought is, acting and solving the problem is the role of line manager. And the third thought, I'm a rubbish manager if I can't solve their problems. So it's not much of a mystery for us to find out why Sarah is rescuing, even when she knows, in theory, that she shouldn't be. Those three thoughts are driving a feeling and an urge to act and solve people's problems. Now, imagine if you have a one to one conversation with somebody and they're saying, I'm a bit overwhelmed, I've got a lot going on. And your sincere beliefs are, I have to act and solve the problem. It's my role as line manager to act and solve the problem. And I am a rubbish manager if I can't solve their problems. If you were sincerely believing those three things, you would act and solve their problems because that's what you're believing you should do. That's what you're believing that your role as line manager actually is. And to top it off, I'm guessing you don't want to be a rubbish manager, but you're believing that you will be if you don't act and solve their problems. So now we know why Sarah is rescuing. But for most people, and maybe even for Sarah, until I asked her that question, the thoughts, the beliefs that were driving that rescuing behavior are usually unconscious. Sarah probably hasn't decided that her role as line manager is to act and solve people's problems and that she's a rubbish line manager if she doesn't. It might just be an unconscious belief which is sitting there, but that unconscious belief is driving this behavior. So it's good to know what it is. And you might be like Sarah. You might be believing that you're a rubbish manager if you can't solve people's problems. You may be saying that it's your job to solve people's problems and that you have to act and find solutions for people. If you're believing that, you're probably going to be rescuing too. But the good news in this situation is, just like Sarah, once you can actually spot what you're believing, what you're thinking, you have the opportunity to stand back and say, okay, that's what I have been thinking. And that thinking has been leading to this result of rescuing. But actually, is that right? Am I a rubbish manager if I don't act and solve everybody's problems? At least if you can see those thoughts clearly, like we can see Sarah's thoughts clearly, you get the opportunity to stand back and say, hang on a minute, let's test it out. Our next rescuer is Alex, and Alex leads a team within his organization. His team provides some specialist advice in his organization, so they're responsive to requests from other people. And Alex told me when I asked him about rescuing about a situation where he rescues a team member who is struggling or stressed because, and here we find out his thinking, just like we found out Sarah's thinking. His thought is when people struggle or become stressed, it's a sign that he's a bad manager. Now, again, that might be a completely untested assumption on his part. If his team struggle or become stressed, is he really a bad manager? But what we know is, while he's believing that thought, whether it's conscious or unconscious, he's going to jump in and rescue people. He has to jump in and rescue people if they become struggling or stressed. But he gives us a specific example which shows us that it may not even be a rescue situation. It may even happen before that to prevent them from becoming struggling and stressed. So Alex said his team member was asked to summarize a complex high-risk matter. So he says rather than allow the team member to struggle and get to grips with the situation, he read all the documents and flagged the further information that they'd need. That turned into a discussion about what info was missing. And he says, before I knew it, I was reviewing all the info and mostly completing the task myself. Typical rescuing, right? You end up jumping in, pulling somebody out of the situation, and usually, or very often, you end up doing the work yourself, just like Alex did in this situation. And we know he was thinking if his team members struggle or become stressed, it's a sign that he's a bad manager. So, what we can see that he did in that situation was jumped in to rescue the person even before they had the opportunity to struggle or become stressed. And we're not judging Alex for this, but we're using it as a clue to guide us and see why we rescue. And Alex gave us another clue because he told us how he feels. He said, if people become stressed or struggle, I feel very uncomfortable. So that's his feeling line of that model, very uncomfortable. When his thinking line is, if people struggle or become stressed, it's a sign that I'm a bad manager. That makes him feel very uncomfortable. Most of us will take steps to avoid feeling very uncomfortable. And for some of us, that might mean that we jump in and rescue people even before the moment where they struggle and become stressed. Because we don't want to feel very uncomfortable, or we get out of it by jumping in and rescuing them. Now, if you're talking about an actual rescue situation where you're jumping in and saving somebody who's drowning, for instance, pretty good that that situation would make you feel very uncomfortable. And pretty good that that discomfort is going to drive you to help save that person's life. In some situations, a very useful drive, it's a very useful urge. But in this work situation, sometimes not that helpful. And Alex also had some insight into what the results might be of this rescuing. So, what the impact might be. And he said he appreciates that rescuing could undermine confidence within the team. And they may think that I'm micromanaging or not trusting them to do a good job. Now, we don't know. They may be thinking that or they may not. But when we reach in and rescue, whether that's in Sarah's example or in Alex's example or your example, there's at least the potential that people end up dependent on us. There's the potential that they end up being de-skilled or at least not growing or developing in the way that they could do if they have the opportunity to couple with these difficult moments or these difficult pieces of work. So now it's time to meet our third and final rescuer, Valerie. Now, Valerie is the leader of a whole area in her organization, and she's responsible for quite a few people. Those people are all people leaders in their own right. And when I asked her about rescuing, she told me about the drama triangle. So that tells me Valerie knows the theory. She's probably been on the leadership training. So just like Sarah, she knows the theory is that we shouldn't be rescuing. But she could still identify a couple of examples where it was happening. And she could identify what might have happened as a result. So she told us the most common example for her is when someone in her team has been asked to do a task and for whatever reason they've delivered it back to her late. She sees that it's been poorly executed in some way and she notices that the person who's done the work has either left for the day or they don't have the capacity to do anything right then. This piece of work is now up against a deadline and needs sending to the client. And in that situation, plugging it into that model that we looked at earlier, her action line is to set aside what she's doing, change her plan, sorts out what's in front of her, and delivers this piece of work to the client so that it can be on time. And if we think about the result of that model, it's probably that she works for longer than she planned to that day. Maybe it's that she has less time in the evening. It's also she ends up doing somebody else's work. She says that a potential result she identifies is that she maybe has inadvertently enabled further poor performance on the part of the person doing the work because they either didn't realize that they weren't meeting the standard because she's done the work to correct things in the background, or they're just using her as a safety net. And her other interesting insight was that in that situation, she can end up feeling like a victim. So when we think about that drama triangle, and there's a whole episode on the drama triangle if you haven't listened to it, there is the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. So the person who does the rescuing, as she points out, can also feel like the victim when they're frustrated or annoyed that they've ended up doing the work. And this is very characteristic of what I see when it comes to rescuing, is that actually most people, they're not taking work off people's plate and being like, I'm so happy to do this because I actually wanted to do this work in the first place. No, it's more like I feel like I have to do this, even though I don't really know why. And then they can end up feeling frustrated, resentful, annoyed that they've got more in their basket than other people. So you can turn from this rescuer into this victim. There are 3 examples, and you might recognize yourself in some of those examples. I think I've coached on examples like that many, many, many times. So, what can you actually do about it? And I've identified 7 things that I think could help you if you're a rescuer. And this really is the first one, and it's to identify the triggers. So, to notice what thoughts and feelings are driving that urge to rescue. Even if they're not completely obvious to you, they will be in there. You will be thinking something which is driving that rescuing behavior. Now, it may be that you're thinking something like Sarah, which is, it's my role as line manager to act and solve their problems. And if I don't, I'm a rubbish manager. Maybe you're thinking that, or maybe you're thinking something else, but there is a belief, maybe unconscious, which is driving this rescuing behavior. And it's your job now to figure out what that is, because that's going to help you to really get under the skin of this issue and start understanding, why is it still happening even though I don't want it to be? And once you're aware of what that thinking or what those beliefs are, you can take a step back and say, okay, is that really true? Am I really a rubbish manager if I don't act and solve their problems? You can do a bit of critical analysis on that thinking or that belief if you can actually see it, but you can only do that when you can actually see it. So that's my first suggestion. Identify those thoughts and feelings that are driving that urge to rescue. Number 2 is think long term. So when we're doing rescuing, we're trying to make things feel better in the moment. We're trying to solve the problem in the moment. But what our brain won't offer up is, what is the long term impact of this continuing to happen? But I want you to stop and think about that for a second. What is the impact on you if you continue to rescue people around you in the way that you're doing now? Think about 6 months down the line. Think about a year down the line. Think about 5 years down the line. What is the impact on you? Do you end up overwhelmed, exhausted? Do you end up doing work that you really shouldn't be doing? Does that have an impact on a strategy you're trying to drive forward or important work that you're trying to get done? Does that have an impact on your organization? Does it have an impact on your clients? Does it have an impact on the people you serve? Does it have an impact on your home life if it means that you're overworking? Think about the long term, because your brain is not going to do that in the moment. But also think about the long term for the people who you are rescuing. What happens for them if you keep doing it? 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 5 years down the line, imagine you're still rescuing them. Then what? Are they de-skilled? Are they dependent? Are they unable to manage the peaks in their own workload? Are they unable to develop because they're not able to grapple with certain situations? Are they unaware that the work they're doing is not actually of the standard that you require? Are they just enabled to continue using you as a safety net? So, by identifying your triggers and thinking long term, that is to try and help you to change the pattern, which is creating the urge. We want you to step back from the cliff and solve the problem further away so you don't end up at the edge of the cliff, which is this urge moment where you just jump in and rescue. But while you're learning how not to rescue, you probably will find yourself at the edge of this cliff with this urge to rescue. So, what can you do when you feel this urge? And Sarah says she uses some stock phrases. She has a couple of sentences that she keeps in her back pocket that when she feels the urge to rescue, she can just use in the moment. Now, she didn't tell me what they were, and they're going to be different for everyone. But is there a couple of phrases that you think you could have in your back pocket? It could be something like, what solutions have you thought of? Or what would you like to have happen next? What do you think you could do for the best? Think about your rescuing scenarios and the stock phrases that might give you the time and space to allow them to start doing a bit of self rescuing. Number 4 is to practice silence. So when we have an urge, it wants us to move, it wants us to act, it wants us to solve, it wants us to do. That's what urges do. They generate this kind of energy that makes us want to do, fast, fast, fast. So try silence. when somebody brings that particular problem where you maybe would usually jump in and rescue, try silence. See what happens. If you just leave a bit of space, and you may have to just take a breath, you may have to relax. When you feel that urge or that normal moment where you would be triggered to jump in and rescue, just relax and see what happens. Number 5 is to try holding them in high regard. So, very often when I'm coaching somebody on rescuing, what we find out is that when the rescuing's happening, we're not holding the person we're rescuing in very high regard. We're not really seeing them as a very capable, competent, expert, resourceful professional. We're seeing them as some victim who needs to be rescued. Now, if somebody is drowning, they are a victim, potentially, who needs to be rescued. But in a work situation, you're probably dealing with somebody who is a capable, resourceful, competent professional, potentially highly paid professional. So this rescuing behavior might reveal that you're viewing them as a victim, and not sure that that is quite the right way to be viewing any adult in a work capacity. So think about the people who you're rescuing. Do you hold them in high regard? Do you think of them as a competent, resourceful professional or not? And what if you just tried doing that? The next time you have a conversation with them, think of them as a resourceful, competent, expert, highly paid professional, and then see whether your action changes. Number 6 is to think of yourself as a coach rather than a manager. So when we think about Sarah's example, she said the role of line manager is to act and solve problems. But what if in that situation, Sarah thinks of herself as a coach? When I'm coaching, if I'm doing my job properly, I'm not offering any advice. I don't think that I'm the expert in terms of the scenario that someone's bringing to me, but I assume that the person sat with me is a resourceful, capable professional who can figure this situation out. Given some time, yes, and maybe some space, and maybe some well placed questions to help them explore what's happening. What if you thought of yourself as a coach instead of a manager? That might help you not to rescue. And number 7, this one was identified by our rescuer, Valerie, is to have the uncomfortable conversations. So you might have listened to that number 5 tip about holding them in high regard and thought, you know what though? The people who I rescue, I really don't hold in high regard. Maybe the people you rescue, you don't think of as competent professionals. And I'm just going to read you what Valerie wrote here. She said, sometimes the way through is having the difficult conversation to say that job was delivered late and it wasn't of the standard that I needed. It put me under a lot of pressure to review and resolve it to make sure the deadline for the client was met. I know this can be a difficult and pressured job, and I've signed up to that, but so have you. And if you're going to deliver late, I need you to be available to pick up the actions and get to work on the standard required so we can send it out on time. Now, she nails that, right? But that is not necessarily an easy conversation. And some of the reason why this rescuing behavior might be happening is because you are avoiding having the difficult conversation or the series of difficult conversations that you really know that maybe you need to have in order for this person to move up to the standard that you require. So work to have those difficult conversations might be what's going to help you to stop rescuing. I hope that was useful to you. Thank you to our podcast community, those rescuers, Sarah, Alex, and Valerie, not their real names, who know who they are and who provided their examples specifically so that you could learn from them. Thank you to them. And if you've got a specific example of something that you're struggling with, do feel free to send it in to me, because we could potentially build a whole podcast episode around it to help you and probably loads of other people in the podcast audience. I'll leave a link in the show notes so that you can get in touch with me. And if you want to come and work with me, there's two ways that you can do that right now. The first is to join the Members Club. So if you are a female professional, the Members Club is a place for supporting, sustaining, and helping you develop at work. And we do that through a mixture of digital learning, trainings, a private podcast, and a group coaching, which we have every other week live inside the Members Club. If you like the podcast and the stuff that we talk about here, the Members Club is somewhere where you're going to get help to actually embed the things that you're learning. So to take it from theory into action. Maybe it's like rescuing, where you're like, I know I shouldn't be doing it. And I know the theory is that I shouldn't be doing it, but I'm still doing it. The Members Club is somewhere where you could come, get some coaching and get some support to actually figure out what is happening behind the scenes, which is preventing you from putting something into practice. And then you can keep coming back and getting support as you do things differently. The second way you can work with me is to have private one-on-one coaching. And in private coaching, we're looking at your very specific scenarios and challenges and where you'd like to be, where you'd like to get to. And then I'm supporting you, coaching you, and helping you to get there. If you want to grow your professional confidence this year, then I encourage you, come and do some private coaching, or come and join the Members Club, or both. Finally, a free way where you can get some immediate support is to take the confidence assessment. So this is an online tool and it's designed to help you figure out where your confidence is at and why. And once you've taken the assessment, it's a few simple questions. You'll get some resources in your inbox to help you think about how you're going to grow your professional confidence from exactly where you are. All right. That's all I have for you this week. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.